One of the reasons Trump is waiting is because he's delighted to see just how effective Israel's military aerial campaign has been against Iranian facilities. And he would love it if, as the coup de grace, he could send in his B-2 bombers with those massive MOP bombs, the massive ordnance penetrator, and wipe out Fordo.
All eyes have been on the Middle East all week, but probably all eyes on Washington as much. Donald Trump is the major player in all of this. There's echoes of Iraq in 2003, but the question still remains is what will he do and why will he do it?
And Donald Trump is exactly where he wishes to be all of the time, absolutely center stage with everybody around the world waiting for signs of his decision on whether US forces will join with Israel in this war on Iran. US media sources are making it clear that they understand he has now in his own head decided to approve US involvement. The issue is timing. He said the other day that he wanted to leave it till the last second to actually order US forces into action. We sort of, I guess, have to decide or think very carefully about the legality of all of this. I have to say, when you just played the clip of Priti Patel saying, as far as we in the UK are concerned in our position, we cannot, she said, hide behind legal issues. I was pretty gobsmacked by that, because unless you're saying that you don't care anymore about international law when it comes to conflict, then you have to consider very carefully the legality of military action. Israel has described what it did with its first attack on Iran and its nuclear facilities as preemptive action, and there is a complex international legal argument about whether preemptive action is indeed legally justified. But others say, well, there's no sign, and the US intelligence services saw no sign that Iran was absolutely on the cusp of weaponizing its nuclear capability. So the international law perspective, to me, is hugely important. It's very difficult. And when I hear that the UK Attorney General is advising the UK government to be very cautious about this, I don't see that as hiding behind the law. I think it is fundamentally important.
I tell you who doesn't care about legal advice, so that will be Donald Trump. I mean, he famously, his behaviour in the first 6 months, if something is constitutional, it's queried whether it's constitutional or not, he won't bother about that. He'll worry about that later.
Absolutely.
So the question is, what's in it for him? And I've said before, I think he's attracted to a big bang. I just think he is. And if he feels that he can solve a problem in his terms by dropping a giant bomb in one place and then move on, he'll do it. The question, Stephen, is that even if he does successfully attack the Fordo region, get rid of that enrichment capacity beneath the mountains, is that the end? Or could that ever be the end?
It won't be the end. I'm with you all the way on your analysis. I think one of the reasons Trump is waiting is because he's delighted to see just how effective Israel's military aerial campaign has been against Iranian facilities. And he would love it if, as the coup de grace, he could send in his B-2 bombers with those massive MOP bombs, the massive ordnance penetrator, and wipe out Fordo. Number one, I think that's very difficult. The military analysts I talk to tell me that they believe that the site is at least 80 meters, if not 100 meters, into the mountain, underneath the rock. And even those penetrator bombs may not be able to reach that far down. Of course, they can try and close off all the entry and exit points, but nonetheless, total destruction is difficult. But even if they do it, what is this war really about? I mean, once the Americans are in it, it's very difficult for them just to sort of do one operation and walk away. And then they have to consider with the Israelis where the end point is. Bibi Netanyahu has said that as far as he's concerned, he now wants to see the end of the Khamenei Ayatollah Mullah regime. But just wiping out Fordo wouldn't necessarily, in fact, very unlikely to finish off the regime, because it's hard to see what would replace that regime. Once you start, it's very difficult to stop. And Donald Trump loves the drama. He loves the idea of the coup de grace. But I am sure there are people around him still, despite the fact he's filled all of his key posts in security and defense with like-minded people, there will be professionals who will be still telling him, sir, this is not as simple as you would like it to be.
So the question for us, I suppose, in Britain is, what do we want done in our name? Because there's the realpolitik of this, which is if America goes in, the pressure will be on us to do something. Maybe it's just as small as letting them use our base in Diego Garcia, or as large as saying we're going to offer some sort of military support. Where do you think people are? Where are you on what could be done in our name?
I'm strongly of the opinion that we shouldn't be meddling. America using a base is different. I think there are agreements between the UK and the US about using bases anyway. So, I won't comment on that because I don't know the legalities of that. But I personally believe we shouldn't be sending troops. We shouldn't be bombing. We shouldn't be backing America in any way, because we risk getting attacked ourselves. I was 8 years old when we went into Iraq, but I remember it. And we saw an influx of terror attacks in our country. That will happen again because there will be terrorists who are backing Iran who will attack us. And speaking also as someone who has links to the Middle East, so I'm half Turkish, I've got family in Turkey. The Middle East don't want Britain meddling again. No. They say that Britain has meddled enough. And
this question of regime changes, that's exactly the pertinent question, is that you might say, and people might say, the mullahs are an appalling regime, and I think most right-minded people would agree with that. Whether or not Western inflected regime change is even possible to be successful is maybe another question entirely.
Yes, the West don't really understand the Middle Eastern mentality. So if the West were to put in a new government or whatever, I just don't think it would work. I don't think that's possible. I think. What
do you mean? Just that's interesting. What is the Middle Eastern mentality? Because you've got some links there. What's the distinction that you're drawing there?
The whole culture, the whole way of thinking is so very different from the West. There are Western things that Western pop culture has come through, but the way of life is completely different, and I just don't think they understand that.
Stephen, can I ask you, we know, I think there's a general consensus that Iran having the capacity to build a nuclear weapon is a very bad thing. And most leaders around the world have said that publicly. There is a question about whether diplomacy can achieve, de-risking that area. What do you think, if everybody agrees Iran shouldn't have the nuclear capacity and it has enriched uranium up to 60%, what is the next step that stops it from developing a bomb?
It's a great question. What the approach was in that era before Donald Trump changed everything, the approach was to do it through negotiation and monitoring. And there was this agreement which went by the acronym, the JCPOA, which was drawn up during the Obama years and which ultimately the Iranians signed on to, which required very close monitoring of their nuclear program. And it, at the time, appeared to be the most effective way of controlling what the Iranians were doing. The Iranians, of course, have always argued their nuclear program is basically civilian, but nonetheless, they were enriching uranium and a lot of it, and to a degree which didn't really make sense to most people in terms of a civil nuclear program. So there was a fundamental problem, but the monitors were there. Of course, Donald Trump then chose to rip up that agreement and take the US out of it. And after that, the Iranians basically let rip and massively upscaled their enrichment program. So I suppose the argument is, well, first of all, I wouldn't start from here, but if I had to start from here, I still probably would believe that the most effective way of keeping a control and a lid on what the Iranians are up to is through this international negotiation and monitoring process. The Israelis, don't forget, have always, from the very beginning, wanted to destroy any Iranian nuclear capability. They've always wanted to. In fact, if you look at the record, Netanyahu has been talking about Iran being on the cusp of weaponizing nukes for at least 15 years, if not more. So this is a window of opportunity for Israel, but whether the military solution is the right one or the only one is a debate that I think is truly important and which the Israelis don't necessarily have the only position on.
So if we move off this, Israeli hospital hit by Iran this morning. Is it possible to look at that without looking at through the prism of Gaza and the strikes by Israel in Gaza? Lots of our listeners have got in touch saying that. Some people have drawn a distinction. We had a guest from Israel on drawing a distinction between how Israel seek to operate and how Iran seeks to operate. The Israelis are calling what Iran have done today a war crime. Is it possible to regard something like an Iran strike on an Israeli hospital without thinking of Gaza at all?
Not for me, it isn't. Absolutely not.
No.
And
Not for me either. I think in any sort of moral world universe we inhabit, we have to look at things like that and be despairing of them and reject them and regard them as intolerable and unacceptable wherever they occur.
And so, was it the first thing you thought of when you saw it this morning?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, how could you not think of Gaza when you see that?
And what do you make of the distinction drawn by Israel that we had Elon Levy on? He said that when they strike against Hamas targets, there's collateral damage, but Iran have targeted civilians, and that's fundamentally different in their view.
Well, the Israeli government is going to say that. They're going to believe that, and I don't know, that's their right to believe that, but I don't believe that.
No, hang on, Stig, I think this is so important. I mean, what we see with the Israelis is that they have a profoundly impressive capability to do these sort of incredibly pinpointed strikes when they want to. You know, we've seen their capability in Tehran to hit just one floor, one apartment in a residential block to take out a particular Iranian military leader. So they can be forensic, but they have not chosen to be forensic in Gaza. And it's not just about the fact they have hit many hospitals. We've also seen them blow up universities and celebrate the fact. We've seen them in recent days shooting at people queuing up for food at humanitarian relief stations. So when one sees civilians die, whether it be in a hospital or a food queue, surely one has to say this is intolerable. And surely the Israelis have to recognize that.